The courtroom was alive with whispers, the kind that filled spaces when people weren't sure what to expect next. Ethan Carter stood at the center of it all, his hands resting lightly on the wooden railing in front of him. He adjusted his tie, nervously, though he tried not to let it show. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he had been here before, many times. This time, however, felt different. Ethan was a deputy attorney general, someone who spent most days fighting for justice in ways that often went unnoticed. Today, though, every eye in the room was fixed on him. He was defending Marcus Hill, a young black man accused of assaulting a police officer during a routine traffic stop. It wasn't hard to see why this case mattered so much to Ethan. To him, it wasn't just about one man. It was about exposing a system that too often failed people like Marcus. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, a woman named Lisa Moore, sat confidently. She had built her case around the idea that Marcus had acted aggressively without provocation, but Ethan knew better. He had spent countless hours reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together what really happened that night. What he found was troubling, not just because it pointed to Marcus's innocence, but because it revealed something darker: racial bias. As Ethan began speaking, his voice carried across the quiet room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he started, pausing to look each member in the eye. "This case is not just about Marcus Hill, it's about fairness. It's about whether we believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law." His words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. He moved on to explain how the traffic stop had unfolded. According to the arresting officer, Detective Ryan Morris, Marcus became belligerent almost immediately after being pulled over. But Ethan presented witness statements that told a different story. One bystander, an elderly woman named Margaret, described seeing the officers escalate the situation unnecessarily. Another witness, a delivery driver named Chris, recalled hearing Marcus ask calmly why he'd been stopped, only to be met with hostility. Ethan's tone grew firmer as he addressed inconsistencies in the police report. "If you compare these accounts," he said, pointing to documents displayed on a screen, "you'll notice details don't add up. For example, Detective Morris claims Marcus stepped out of his car first, yet multiple witnesses say otherwise." The jury listened intently, some nodding along while others scribbled notes. Even the judge, Laura Bennett, leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Ethan could feel the tension in the room shifting. People were starting to question the narrative they'd been given. But outside the courtroom, things were far less calm. A group of officers had gathered near the entrance, their faces tight with anger. Among them was Detective Morris himself, the same man whose actions were now being scrutinized. He gripped the railing of the courthouse steps, his jaw clenched as he muttered to his colleagues. "That guy's making us look bad," he said, glancing toward the doors. "Like we're the villains here." His partner, Officer Greg Allen, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and he's dragging our names through the mud. Someone needs to shut him up." It didn't take long for their frustration to boil over. When the trial recessed for lunch, Ethan exited through a side door, hoping to avoid attention. He hadn't eaten much that morning, and wanted nothing more than a quiet moment to collect his thoughts. But as he turned the corner, he froze. There, they were, the same officers he'd been challenging inside the courtroom. Their eyes locked onto him instantly. "Well, well," Detective Morris sneered, stepping closer. "Look who decided to show his face." Ethan took a step back, instinctively clutching his briefcase tighter. "I'm just doing my job," he replied evenly, though his pulse quickened. "If you have any issues, take them up with the court." Morris ignored him, moving closer still. "Your job is tearing apart everything we work for. You think you're some kind of hero? All you're doing is stirring up trouble." The other officers formed a loose semicircle around Ethan, cutting off his escape routes. Pedestrians, passing by, slowed to watch, unsure of what might happen next. Ethan scanned the crowd, searching for help, but no one intervened. Instead, they kept walking, pretending not to notice. "What do you want from me?" Ethan asked, his voice steady, despite the fear creeping into his chest. "We want you to stop lying," Morris shot back. "You're twisting facts to fit your agenda." And if you keep pushing this nonsense, there'll be consequences. Ethan swallowed hard, realizing this wasn't going to end peacefully. Without another word, he turned and hurried away, weaving through the growing crowd. Behind him, he heard shouts and footsteps as the officers gave chase. Panic surged through him as he ducked into a narrow alleyway, his mind racing for a way out. The alley twisted and turned, offering little cover. Trash cans lined the walls, and puddles reflected the gray sky above. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, spotting Morris and his team closing in. His lungs burned as he pushed himself faster, dodging obstacles and praying for an opening. Ahead, he spotted a small cafe with its door propped open. Desperation drove him inside, where the smell of coffee and pastries greeted him. Patrons sat at tables, chatting quietly or typing on laptops. For a split second, Ethan considered blending in, sitting down as if he belonged. But then the bell above the door jingled loudly, and he saw Morris appear in the doorway. "Over there!" Morris yelled, pointing directly at Ethan. Panic erupted as customers scrambled to get out of the way. Chairs scraped against the floor, and cups clattered onto tables. Ethan didn't hesitate. He bolted toward the back exit, leaving behind his coat and a half-finished cup of coffee someone had abandoned. As he burst through the door, he spared one last glance at the chaos he'd left behind. Out in the open again, Ethan ran harder than ever, his heart pounding in his ears. He didn't know where he was going or how he would escape, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible, and somewhere deep down, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Ethan's legs burned as he sprinted down the narrow streets, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The sound of footsteps behind him grew louder with every second. He glanced over his shoulder and saw Detective Morris and his team closing in, their faces hard with determination. His heart raced faster than his feet, and he knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He ducked into another alleyway, hoping to lose them among the shadows. Trash bins lined the walls and graffiti covered the brick surfaces. The air smelled of dampness and decay. Ethan pressed himself against the cold bricks, trying to catch his breath and listen for any sign of movement. But it didn't take long before he heard the unmistakable echo of boots on pavement. They were still coming. Ethan's mind raced. He had no plan, no backup, and no way to defend himself. All he could do was keep running. Pushing off from the wall, he bolted forward again, his shoes slipping slightly on the wet ground. Ahead, he spotted a small cafe with its lights glowing warmly. Without hesitation, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cafe was cozy, filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and freshly baked goods. A few customers sat at tables, sipping drinks or typing on laptops. Behind the counter, a young barista named Anna was busy steaming milk. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Then he grabbed a nearby coat from a rack by the door and draped it over his shoulders, pulling the hood up to cover his face. He moved quickly, sliding into an empty seat near the window. His hands trembled as he set his briefcase on the table. He tried to look casual, pretending to scroll through his phone while keeping one eye on the door. For a few moments, everything seemed calm. The hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine created a sense of normalcy that almost made him forget the chaos outside. But then the bell above the door jingled loudly, and Ethan's blood ran cold. Detective Morris walked in, flanked by two other officers. Their eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of their target. Ethan sank lower in his chair, pulling the hood further over his face. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone in the cafe could hear it. Morris's gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment, but then he turned away, scanning the other patrons. Ethan held his breath, willing himself to blend into the background. Just when he thought he might actually escape, notice one of the officers pointed toward him. "There!" the officer shouted, pointing directly at Ethan. "That's him!" Panic erupted in the cafe. Customers jumped to their feet, some grabbing their bags and rushing toward the exit, while others simply froze in place, unsure of what to do. Anna, the barista, dropped the cup she was holding, shattering it on the floor. Ethan didn't waste another second. He sprang to his feet, knocking over his chair in the process, and bolted toward the back door. Behind him, he heard the officers shouting as they gave chase. The back door led to a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. At the end of the hall, Ethan found another door marked Exit. He yanked it open and stumbled out into the cool afternoon air. He emerged into a small parking lot, surrounded by cars parked haphazardly. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him, growing closer with each passing second. Ethan darted between the vehicles, weaving left and right in an effort to throw off his pursuers. His chest tightened with every step, and his vision blurred as exhaustion began to take its toll. Just as he reached the far side of the lot, he spotted a figure standing near a black sedan. It was Judge Laura Bennett, her robe still draped over her shoulders. She had been leaving the courthouse earlier when she noticed the commotion and decided to investigate. Now, seeing Ethan running toward her with a group of angry officers hot on his heels, she immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Stop this at once," she shouted, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Her presence alone commanded attention, and the officers skidded to a halt, startled by her sudden appearance. Ethan stopped too, panting heavily as he leaned against a nearby car. "For support. What is the meaning of this?" Judge Bennett demanded, her tone stern and unyielding. She stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and the officers. "You are behaving in a manner entirely inappropriate for law enforcement. Explain yourselves." Detective Morris opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He exchanged uneasy glances with his colleagues, clearly caught off guard by the judge's intervention. Finally, Officer Greg Allen spoke up, though his voice lacked conviction. "Your Honor, we were just, trying to have a conversation with Mr. Carter about the case." "A conversation?" Judge Bennett repeated, raising an eyebrow skeptically. "Is that what you call chasing someone through the streets and into private businesses? I've seen enough to know this is unacceptable behavior. You should be ashamed of yourselves." The officers shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, their bravado evaporating in the face of her authority. Ethan watched silently, still struggling to catch his breath. He felt a flicker of relief, knowing that someone powerful was standing up for him, but he also knew the danger wasn't over yet. Judge Bennett turned to Ethan, her expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Ethan nodded weakly. "I'm fine," he managed to say, though his trembling hands told a different story. "Thank you for stepping in." She gave him a reassuring nod before turning back to the officers. "This matter isn't finished," she said firmly. "I will be reporting this incident to the appropriate authorities, and if I hear of any further misconduct, there will be consequences." With that, she gestured for Ethan to follow her. Together, they walked toward her car, leaving the officers standing awkwardly in the parking lot. As they drove away, Ethan finally allowed himself to relax, sinking into the passenger seat with a deep sigh. "That was close," he murmured, staring out the window at the passing scenery. "It certainly was," Judge Bennett agreed, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But I won't tolerate such behavior, especially from those who are supposed to uphold the law. We need to address this properly." Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but having someone like Judge Bennett on his side gave him hope. For now, he focused on catching his breath and planning his next move. Whatever happened, he was determined to fight for justice, not just for Marcus Hill, but for everyone who deserved fairness in a system that often failed them. As the car sped away, Ethan glanced back one last time. In the distance, he could see the officers still standing in the parking lot, looking defeated. Though the chase was over, the battle had only just begun. The drive to Judge Bennett's home was quiet, but the silence between Ethan and the judge felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ethan stared out the window, watching the city streets blur past as they headed toward a quieter part of town. His heart had finally slowed down from its frantic pace, but his mind was still racing. He replayed the events of the day over and over again in his head: the chase, the cafe, the confrontation in the parking lot. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie rather than real life. Judge Bennett glanced at him occasionally, her expression unreadable. She seemed lost in thought too, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Finally, she broke the silence. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what happened today." Ethan nodded, turning his attention away from the window. "I know," he replied, his voice low. "It's hard to believe they would act like that, like I'm some kind of criminal for doing my job." "They crossed a line," Judge Bennett said, her tone sharp with anger. "What they did wasn't just unprofessional, it was dangerous, and if we don't address this properly, it will only get worse." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been fighting against bias in the justice system for years, but nothing has ever felt this personal before. I didn't expect them to react so violently." Judge Bennett nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "You're not alone in this, Ethan. People like you are needed more than ever. But standing up for what's right comes with risks, and you have to be prepared for them." The car turned onto a tree-lined street, and Judge Bennett pulled into the driveway of a modest house surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges. The outside was simple, but it exuded warmth and stability, qualities that matched the judge herself. She parked the car and gestured for Ethan to follow her inside. Once inside, Judge Bennett led him to a cozy living room with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. She offered him a seat on the couch while she disappeared into the kitchen to make tea. Ethan sank into the cushions, feeling the tension in his body slowly ease. For the first time since the chase began, he allowed himself to relax, even if just a little. When Judge Bennett returned, she placed 2 steaming cups of tea on the coffee table and sat down across from him. "Now," she said, leaning forward slightly, "let's figure out our next steps. You can't let this go unanswered." Ethan picked up his cup, letting the warmth seep into his hands. "I agree," he said after taking a sip. "But where do we start? Filing a formal complaint seems like the obvious choice, but I'm worried about retaliation." "That's a valid concern," Judge Bennett admitted. "But staying silent isn't an option either. If we don't hold them accountable, they'll think they can get away with anything. We need evidence, something concrete to back up your claims." Ethan set his cup down and reached for his briefcase, pulling out his phone. "There might be something we can use," he said, scrolling through videos he'd saved earlier. Some bystanders recorded parts of the chase. Maybe those clips can help prove what happened. Judge Bennett's eyes lit up with interest. "That could be exactly what we need," she said. "Gather everything you have, photos, videos, witness statements. We'll build a strong case against them." Over the next hour, they went through the footage together, piecing together a timeline of events. One video showed Ethan being chased down the alleyway, while another captured the chaotic scene inside the cafe. There were even snippets of the officers shouting accusations at him in the parking lot. Each clip painted a clearer picture of their misconduct. "This is good," Judge Bennett said, nodding approvingly. "With this kind of evidence, we can take this to higher authorities. Internal Affairs needs to investigate these officers thoroughly." "But what about the trial?" Ethan asked, frowning. "If they find out I'm filing complaints, won't they try to sabotage Marcus's case?" "It's possible," Judge Bennett acknowledged. "Which is why we need to act carefully. I'll handle the legal side of things. I'll file the complaints anonymously for now and ensure they're directed to independent investigators. That way it won't interfere with your work on Marcus's defense." Ethan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I couldn't do this without your support." "You don't have to thank me," Judge Bennett replied with a small smile. "This isn't just about helping you or Marcus. It's about protecting the integrity of the justice system. If we let abuses like this slide, we're failing everyone who depends on us." As the evening wore on, they continued discussing strategies and potential outcomes. Judge Bennett shared stories from her own career, moments when she had faced similar challenges. Her experiences gave Ethan hope that change was possible, even in the face of resistance. Eventually, the conversation shifted to broader issues within law enforcement. "It's not just about these officers," Ethan said, frustration creeping into his voice. It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to happen in the first place. How do we fix something so deeply rooted? It starts with accountability, Judge Bennett answered firmly. Every officer who crosses the line needs to face consequences. Once people see that no one is above the law, not even law enforcement, they'll start to trust the system again. Ethan nodded, absorbing her words. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that progress often came in small steps. With Judge Bennett's guidance, he felt more confident about taking those steps. By the time they finished talking, it was late. Judge Bennett offered Ethan a guest room for the night, knowing it wasn't safe for him to return home yet. He accepted, gratefully, too exhausted to argue. As he lay in bed later that night staring at the ceiling, his mind kept drifting back to the day's events. Despite everything, he felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Next morning, Ethan woke early, determined to tackle the day ahead. Judge Bennett joined him for breakfast, and together they finalized their plan. By the time he left her house, Ethan carried not only evidence but also a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them head-on. As he drove away, Judge Bennett stood in her doorway watching until his car disappeared around the corner. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, for either of them, but she also knew that standing up for justice was worth every struggle. And so, with determination burning in their hearts, both Ethan and Judge Bennett prepared to fight for a better future, one step at a time. The next day, Ethan returned to the courthouse with a mix of nerves and determination. He had spent the morning reviewing the evidence he and Judge Bennett had gathered, videos, witness statements, and notes from the previous day's chaos. His briefcase felt heavier than usual, not just because of its contents but because of the responsibility resting on his shoulders. Today wasn't just about defending Marcus Hill. It was about standing up to a system that allowed abuse to go unchecked. As he walked through the courthouse doors, Ethan noticed an unusual buzz in the air. People whispered to each other in hushed tones, glancing at him as he passed. Word of the chase and Judge Bennett's intervention had spread quickly, thanks in part to bystander videos that had made their way online overnight. Reporters lingered near the entrance, snapping photos and shouting questions. Ethan ignored them, keeping his head down as he made his way to the courtroom. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The jury sat quietly, their expressions unreadable. Lisa Moore, the prosecutor, looked flustered, flipping through papers as if searching for something she couldn't find. Detective Morris and his team were conspicuously absent, though Ethan suspected they were somewhere nearby, avoiding the spotlight. Judge Bennett entered shortly after, her presence commanding immediate silence. She took her seat at the bench, her eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. "Before we proceed," Judge Bennett began, her voice firm, "there are matters that need addressing outside the scope of this trial." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Yesterday, an incident occurred involving members of law enforcement and Mr. Carter. While I cannot comment on specifics at this time, I assure you that appropriate action is being taken." Her statement sent ripples through the courtroom. Some jurors exchanged glances while others scribbled notes furiously. Lisa Moore shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly unprepared for this development. Ethan remained calm, though his heart raced beneath his composed exterior. He knew Judge Bennett's words were a warning, a reminder that accountability was coming. When the trial resumed, Ethan focused on presenting Marcus's case with renewed energy. He called Margaret, the elderly woman who had witnessed the traffic stop, to testify. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of what had happened that night. She described how Marcus had remained calm despite the officer's aggressive behavior, contradicting the prosecution's claims of hostility. Another witness, Chris, the delivery driver, corroborated her account, adding credibility to Ethan's arguments. Lisa Moore tried to poke holes in their testimonies, but Ethan countered her efforts skillfully. By the end of the day, the jury seemed more skeptical of the prosecution's narrative. Still, Ethan knew the real battle would take place outside the courtroom. Later that afternoon, Ethan met Judge Bennett in her chambers to discuss their next steps. They reviewed the formal complaints they planned to file against Detective Morris and his team. Judge Bennett had already drafted letters to internal affairs and other oversight bodies, ensuring the investigation would remain independent. She handed Ethan a copy of the documents for his records. "This isn't just about punishing bad actors," Judge Bennett said as they went over the details. "It's about sending a message that misconduct won't be tolerated. If we can expose this incident, others might feel empowered to speak out too." Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "I've been thinking about Officer Gray," he said, suddenly. "You remember him, the officer who came forward privately during the trial. I think he could help us." Judge Bennett raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "He mentioned feeling conflicted about the department's practices," Ethan explained. "If we approach him carefully, maybe he'll provide insider information. It could strengthen our case against systemic bias." "That's risky," Judge Bennett cautioned. "Whistleblowers often face backlash. Are you sure he's willing to take that step?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted. "But it's worth exploring. If we want real change, we need allies within the system." Judge Bennett agreed, and they decided to reach out to Officer Gray discreetly. After finalizing their plans, Ethan left the courthouse, heading home to prepare for the following day. As he drove, his phone buzzed with notifications. Social media was ablaze with reactions to the videos of the chase. Supporters praised his courage, while critics accused him of exaggerating the situation. Ethan scrolled through the comments, briefly before putting his phone away. Public opinion didn't matter as much as doing the right thing. That evening, Ethan received a call from Officer Gray. The young officer sounded nervous but determined. "Mr. Carter," he began hesitantly, "I saw the news today. You're right, what happened wasn't fair. And I think I can help." Relief washed over Ethan. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Your support means a lot. But I need to warn you it won't be easy." "I understand," Gray replied. "I've seen enough to know the system needs fixing. If sharing what I know can make a difference, then I'm willing to take the risk." They arranged to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe far from the courthouse. Ethan ended the call feeling hopeful. With Gray's potential cooperation, their case against systemic racism in law enforcement could gain significant momentum. The following day, Ethan arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table in the corner where they could talk privately. Officer Gray showed up a few minutes later, wearing plain clothes instead of his uniform. He looked around cautiously before sitting down across from Ethan. "I brought some files," Gray said quietly, sliding a folder across the table. "They include internal reports, emails, and memos. There's evidence of discriminatory practices. Things I've seen firsthand." Ethan opened the folder, his eyes widening as he skimmed the documents. "This is incredible," he said, looking up at Gray. "Are you sure you're okay with sharing this?" Gray nodded, though his expression was troubled. "It's not easy turning against your own colleagues, but staying silent feels worse. I joined the force to protect people, not hurt them." Ethan respected his decision and promised to use the information responsibly. Together, they discussed how to present the evidence without putting Gray in unnecessary danger. By the time they parted ways, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, he believed they might actually have a chance to create lasting change. Back at his office, Ethan organized the new evidence alongside the existing materials. He reached out to trusted contacts in advocacy groups, seeking advice on amplifying their message. Meanwhile, Judge Bennett worked behind the scenes, leveraging her influence to ensure the complaints were taken seriously. Though challenges lay ahead, Ethan no longer felt alone. With allies like Judge Bennett and Officer Gray and the growing public awareness of systemic issues, he dared to hope for a brighter future. One where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality for everyone. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Ethan. With the new evidence provided by Officer Gray, he spent long hours organizing documents, drafting statements, and strategizing with Judge Bennett. The weight of responsibility pressed, heavily on his shoulders, but he refused to let it break him. Every late night and early morning was fueled by determination, a belief that this fight could lead to real change. In the courtroom, tensions remained high. Lisa Moore, the prosecutor, seemed increasingly frustrated as Ethan continued dismantling her case against Marcus Hill. Witness after witness corroborated Ethan's arguments, painting a clear picture of racial bias in the traffic stop. The jury listened intently, their expressions growing more skeptical with each passing day. Even Judge Bennett appeared to lean slightly in Ethan's favor, her rulings often favoring fairness over technicalities. Outside the courthouse, however, the situation was far from calm. Detectives Morris and Allen had become noticeably absent from public view, likely laying low to avoid further scrutiny. But whispers among law enforcement circles suggested they weren't giving up easily. Rumors spread about efforts to discredit Ethan and undermine his credibility. Supporters of the officers argued that Ethan's accusations were exaggerated, claiming he was using the trial as a platform for personal gain. Ethan tried not to let the rumors bother him, focusing instead on the task at hand. He knew that proving systemic racism wasn't just about winning one case. It required exposing patterns of behavior that stretched far beyond Marcus Hill's arrest. With Judge Bennett's guidance, he began compiling a dossier of similar incidents involving Detective Morris and his team. Reports of excessive force, discriminatory profiling, and falsified evidence painted a damning picture of misconduct. One evening, as Ethan worked late in his office, Officer Gray called again. His voice was tense, almost panicked. "Mr. Carter," he said quickly, "you need to be careful. Some of the guys are talking. They know I'm helping you." Ethan froze, gripping the phone tightly. "What do you mean? Are you safe?" "For now," Gray replied. "But they're watching me closely. Someone mentioned my name during roll call today. It felt like a warning." Ethan's stomach churned with worry. He didn't want Gray to face retaliation for doing the right thing. "Listen carefully," Ethan said firmly. "If you feel unsafe, don't hesitate to reach out. We can protect you. There are laws in place for whistleblowers." "I know," Gray said softly. "But it's hard. These are people I've worked with for years. I never thought I'd have to choose sides." "You're not choosing sides," Ethan reassured him. "You're standing up for what's right. That takes courage." After hanging up, Ethan immediately contacted Judge Bennett. She agreed that Gray needed protection and promised to expedite the whistleblower process. Together, they drafted an emergency petition requesting anonymity for Gray until the investigation concluded. They submitted it to Internal Affairs first thing the next morning. Meanwhile, the trial entered its final stages. Ethan delivered his closing arguments with passion and precision, tying together every piece of evidence to expose the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into his face. "This case is about more than Marcus Hill. It's about fairness. It's about whether we believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law." He reminded them of Margaret's testimony, Chris's account, and the inconsistencies in the police report. "The evidence speaks for itself," he concluded. "Marcus Hill did nothing wrong. What happened to him wasn't justice, it was prejudice." Lisa Moore countered with a passionate defense of her case, arguing that the officers acted within protocol and that Ethan's accusations were unfounded. But her words lacked conviction, overshadowed by the overwhelming proof presented by Ethan. As the jury deliberated, Ethan stepped outside for fresh air. Reporters swarmed around him, eager for comments on the trial and the ongoing scandal involving Detective Morris. Ethan kept his responses brief, focusing on the importance of accountability and reform. Inside, Judge Bennett presided over post-trial motions, her demeanor unshakable even as tensions simmered beneath the surface. Hours later, the jury returned with their verdict, not guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers as Marcus embraced his family, tears streaming down their faces. Ethan allowed himself a moment of relief knowing that justice had been served, for now, but the victory was bittersweet. Outside, protesters gathered holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and End police bias. News outlets covered the story extensively, reigniting debates about systemic racism in law enforcement. For many, the trial was a wake-up call, a reminder that change was long overdue. That same evening, Ethan met with Judge Bennett to discuss the aftermath. "This isn't over," she warned him. "Detective Morris and his team will fight back, and we need to be ready." "I know," Ethan replied. "But we've made progress. People are paying attention now. With Officer Gray's help, we can push for reforms that go beyond this case." Judge Bennett nodded approvingly. "You've done good work, Ethan. Keep fighting." Encouraged by her support, Ethan turned his focus to the broader movement. He partnered with advocacy groups to organize community forums and workshops, educating people about their rights and how to report misconduct. He also worked with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Officer Gray, now protected under whistleblower status, became a key ally in these efforts. Though he faced hostility from former colleagues, he stood firm in his decision to speak out. "I joined the force to serve and protect," he told Ethan during one meeting. "If I can help make it better, then it's worth it." As weeks turned into months, the impact of their work began to show. Internal Affairs launched investigations into Detective Morris and his team, uncovering additional instances of misconduct. Public pressure mounted, forcing local authorities to implement reforms such as mandatory bias training and body cameras for all officers. Ethan continued balancing his role as a deputy attorney general with his activism, knowing that true change required persistence. Judge Bennett remained a steadfast supporter, using her position to advocate for justice both inside and outside the courtroom. Together, they inspired others to join the cause, creating a network of allies dedicated to building a fairer future. Though challenges still loomed ahead, Ethan no longer felt overwhelmed. For the first time, he saw glimpses of hope, a brighter path paved by courage, collaboration, and unwavering determination. And as he looked toward the horizon, he knew the fight was far from finished, but neither was his resolve. Months had passed since the trial of Marcus Hill, and life in the city began to shift. The verdict had sparked conversations that went far beyond the courtroom. People who had once stayed silent now found their voices, speaking out about injustices they'd witnessed or experienced. Ethan Carter watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and caution. He knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but he also saw signs of progress, small steps toward a better future. Ethan spent his days working tirelessly on multiple fronts. In addition to handling cases as Deputy Attorney General, he collaborated with advocacy groups to push for systemic reforms. His efforts included drafting legislation aimed at holding law enforcement accountable while promoting transparency. One of the key proposals required police departments to publish annual reports detailing incidents of misconduct and disciplinary actions taken. Another initiative focused on creating independent oversight boards to review complaints against officers. Judge Laura Bennett played a crucial role in these efforts. Using her influence, she advocated for changes within the judicial system, urging colleagues to address bias in sentencing and bail decisions. She also supported community programs designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Together, Ethan and Judge Bennett became symbols of hope for those striving for justice. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Gray continued to play an important part in the movement. Protected under whistleblower status, he provided insider information that exposed patterns of misconduct across several departments. His courage inspired others to come forward, leading to additional investigations. Though Gray faced backlash from former colleagues, he remained steadfast in his decision to speak out. "I didn't join the force to hurt people," he often said during interviews. "If sharing my story can help fix what's broken, then I'll do it." The impact of their combined work was undeniable. Internal Affairs launched probes into multiple officers accused of discriminatory practices, including Detective Ryan Morris and his team. Evidence gathered through Ethan's efforts revealed a pattern of racial profiling, excessive force, and falsified reports. As a result, several officers were suspended or terminated, and some even faced criminal charges. Public pressure mounted as news outlets covered each development extensively. Protesters took to the streets, demanding accountability and reform. Community leaders organized town hall meetings, inviting citizens, activists, and officials to discuss solutions. These events brought together diverse groups united by a shared goal, creating a justice system that treated everyone fairly. Despite the progress, resistance remained strong. Some members of law enforcement pushed back against the reforms, claiming they were unnecessary or unfair. Others argued that increased scrutiny made their jobs harder. Ethan understood their concerns but refused to compromise on principles. Accountability isn't about punishing good officers, he explained during one forum. It's about ensuring trust between law enforcement and the community. Without trust, we can't have safety. As the months rolled on, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. Conversations about race and policing became more open, less defensive. Young people especially embraced the movement, organizing marches and campaigns to raise awareness. Schools introduced lessons on civil rights and social justice, teaching students the importance of standing up for equality. Even local businesses got involved, donating resources to support affected families and funding educational programs. One evening, Ethan attended a community event hosted by a group called Justice for All. The gathering brought together hundreds of people, activists, lawyers, teachers, parents, and children, all committed to making a difference. Ethan stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight. For a moment, he felt overwhelmed by the weight of their collective hope. "Thank you for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "This journey hasn't been easy for any of us. But every step we take brings us closer to a world where fairness isn't just a dream, it's a reality." He spoke about Marcus Hill, whose case had ignited the movement, and thanked Judge Bennett and Officer Gray for their courage. "Change doesn't happen because of one person," he emphasized. "It happens when we stand together, united by our shared values. And today, I see that unity everywhere I look." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing through the night air. Ethan stepped down from the podium, shaking hands and exchanging hugs with attendees. Among them was Marcus himself, accompanied by his family. They thanked Ethan profusely, tears streaming down their faces. "You gave us our lives back," Marcus said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Later that night, Ethan returned home exhausted but fulfilled. He sat on his couch flipping through photos from the event. Each image captured moments of resilience and determination, the kind of spirit that fueled revolutions. As he scrolled, he came across a picture of Judge Bennett addressing the crowd. Her expression was calm yet powerful, a reminder of the strength needed to challenge the status quo. The next morning, Ethan received a call from Judge Bennett. "We did it," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "The city council just passed the transparency bill. It's official." Ethan grinned, relief washing over him. "That's incredible," he replied. "All those late nights, all those battles, they were worth it." "They really were," Judge Bennett agreed. "But this is only the beginning. There's still so much work to do." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I know. But we've proven that change is possible. That's something no one can take away from us." In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued fighting for justice, knowing the battle would never truly end. Yet he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that persistence could overcome even the deepest-rooted injustices. Children played freely in parks, unaware of the struggles adults faced. To them, the world seemed simple and safe. And Ethan realized that was exactly what he was fighting for, a future where everyone, regardless of race or background, could live without fear. As he walked through the courthouse one afternoon, Ethan paused to watch a group of kids laughing and chasing each other outside. Their joy reminded him why he chose this path, to ensure they grew up in a world where fairness wasn't a privilege but a right. With a small smile, he turned and headed back inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Ethan, Judge Bennett, Officer Gray, and countless others, The fight for justice wasn't just a career or a cause, it was a calling. And though the road was long, they moved forward together, guided by hope and driven by love for humanity.